The biggest estate on earth. There's a bloke in a Hobart bookshop last week, I was told, who went in and asked for the biggest mistake in the world. When he saw my book, he said, "That'll do." I hope he's revised his estimate of the title by now. Okay, the biggest mistake on earth. Aborigines made Australia as it was in 1788 by using fire or no fire to distribute plants, then using plant distribution to locate animals. People worked hard to make plants and animals abundant, convenient and predictable. Most Australians now know about what Rhys Jones neatly called fire stick farming in 1969. This practice was not lost on observant early Europeans, men like Ludwig Leichhardt, a much underrated explorer who wrote in 1845, "The natives seem to have burned the grass systematically along every watercourse and around every waterhole in order to have them surrounded with young grass as soon as the rain sets in. It is no doubt connected with a systematic management of their runs." Or George Vancouver, who remarked at Albany in Western Australia, as early as 1791, "Fire is frequently resorted to by rude nations, either for the purpose of encouraging a sweeter growth of herbage in their hunting grounds, or as tools for taking the wild animals of which they are in pursuit." Aborigines themselves stated at Evans Bay in 1849, observing that the grass had been burnt on portions of the flats, the blacks said that the rain that was coming on would make the young grass spring up, and that would bring down the kangaroos, and the blacks would spear them from the scrub. Evans Bay is as far from Albany as you can get in Australia, but both people did the same thing. And Evans Bay is next to Torres Strait, next to islanders who gardened. People could compare their management with Torres Strait agriculture, but they never became gardeners. Instead, they matched the rest of Australia and Tasmania, clearly thinking this more efficient and reliable. Most non-Aborigines failed and fail to see this. They thought Australia's landscapes natural. They waxed lyrical over its, quote, parks, but assumed that primitive hunter-gatherers lacked the skill and inclination to make them. Yet the clue was there in those early observations that Aboriginal fire was to make fresh grass to lure kangaroos. This lure works today. On golf greens, for example, kangaroos prefer to risk flying golf balls and angry greenkeepers to get at the new mown growth, even though longer and safer grass is only metres away. So let's explore this lure. To attract kangaroos after fire, you must make sure they'll go where you've burnt. So you must make sure the grass you burn is the sweetest and most nutritious available. Take care not to burn other grass too close, and provide shelter nearby so kangaroos won't feel vulnerable. To ensure that the grass you burn is the sweetest and most nutritious available, you must put it on the best soil. Trees grow on such soil, so you must burn often to keep it permanently clear of trees, or most trees. Yet, kangaroos shelter among trees, so you must also provide them. Neither too open, so the kangaroos feel exposed, nor too dense, so they fear being slowed down. So beside grass, you must have open forest, and perhaps beyond it, dense forest, to shepherd the roos back towards the grass. In other words, you must make not only the grass, but the land around, using at least 3 distinct fire regimes. Given how long eucalypts live, how long it would take to clear them with fire, this might take centuries to set up. There's no point doing this just in one place, because after you hunt kangaroos, they move on. You must lure them to the next place you've prepared, then the next, and so on. In short, you must pattern the entire country into places which will and won't shepherd kangaroos if you want to farm them successfully. And I'm speaking only of kangaroos. How people made Roo country varied according to whether they were red, that's plains, or grey, that is forest, kangaroos. And think of all the other marsupials, wallabies, bettongs, bilbies, potoroos and so on. Of course, not all in the one area, but each with their own feed and habitat preferences. Then think of the many other plants, animals, birds, insects and reptiles which flourished when Europeans arrived. All had their place, all had food and shelter which suited them. Many are now gone or going. Two factors blended to achieve this remarkable symmetry. One ecological, the other religious. Neither dominates farming peoples like us. Ecologically, once you lay out country variably to suit all other species, you are committed to an extraordinarily complex arrangement of the landscape, which you must maintain carefully and over many generations. Aboriginal religion enforced this. It says that every living thing has a totem, otherwise it can't exist. Even life forms Europeans introduced, rabbits, camels, houseflies, have a totem, and every totem has people who belong to it and at the risk of their souls must care for it. For example, emu people must care for emus and their habitat, and emus must care for them. Totems were central, protecting and enforcing via religious sanction, the most powerful possible in any society. Totems underwrote the ecological arrangement of Australia. This created a continent managed everywhere under the same law for similar biodiverse purposes, no matter what the vegetation. Despite vastly different plant communities, from spinifex to rainforest, from Tasmania to the Kimberleys, there were the same plant patterns, the same relationship between food plants and shelter plants. This made every place useful. Edward Eyre observed in 1841, "No part of the country is so utterly worthless as not to have attractions sufficient occasionally to tempt the wandering savage into its recesses. The very regions which, in the eyes of the European, are most barren and worthless, are to the native the most valuable and productive." Every place was managed with fire or no fire. I say no fire because a conscious decision not to burn also regulates plants and animals. People judged equally what to burn and what not, when, how often and how hot. Naturally, they're more likely to leave tough country unburnt than rich ground, that is, to work with the country, but always grass was on good soil, forest was split by grass, grass carried tree or scrub clumps, undergrowth was uncommon. My book illustrates a common management system in enough dispersed places to say that the system was universal, that Australia was, as the title says, a single estate, and that in this sense, as the subtitle says, Aborigines made Australia. These claims confront some old but dangerous ideas, that Aboriginal society was less advanced than any on earth, most importantly ours, and that hunter-gathering is a primitive preamble to farming and hence industrial society. Notions of terra nullius and the dying race are discredited now, but some still think Aborigines had no great impact on the land, that they merely subsisted off it, floated on its surface, as it were, victims of nature, blind to a way out. How could we ever have thought that? Of course, people organise their resources in future. This is what humans do. 1788's precise management reflects not a lesser culture and society, but a flourishing alternative. Its chief weakness was not primitiveness or want of policy, but its inability to deal with the completely unexpected, the coming of new values, diseases and weapons. Why has it taken so long to see a thing so obvious? Put simply, we see differently. We see through farming eyes. Like our draft horses, we wear the blinkers agriculture imposes. Yet Australia is not like the northern Europe from which most early settlers came. Burn Australia's perennial grasses and they come back green. Burn Europe's annuals and they die. Again, you can predictably lure and locate Australia's animals because there are almost no predators here, whereas Europe's many predators scattered prey, so the notion of using fire to concentrate them was foreign. But above all, we don't see because farmers don't think like hunter-gatherers. Peter Dwyer showed this in the New Guinea highlands. He compared three groups, one gardeners, one largely hunter-gatherers and one both. Mentally and physically, only the gardeners fenced their world. The others had no words for centre and periphery, no sense of being spiritually distinct from the rest of creation, no landform hierarchy. For the gardeners, wilderness began just beyond their fences. For the hunter-gatherers, it didn't exist. Fences on the ground made fences in the mind. Australia had no fences in 1788. Some places were managed more closely than others, but none were beyond the pale. Melbourne's plant patterns typified most of Australia. Newcomers commonly called the district a park. In 1802, Peter Good thought it had a very pleasing appearance, having much resemblance to a gentleman's park in England, being covered with a fine green grass and numerous trees and bushes in pleasing irregularity, and so far apart as to admit the whole surface to be covered with grass. Much of the herbage had been burnt a few months ago. In 1803, William Crook described Port Phillip as beautifully diversified with hills and dales. It is nearly covered with trees, with grass between, and no underwood scarcely, so that some parts look like a park, others orchards, etc. One can scarcely walk 10 yards without meeting traces of the natives. Perhaps a 10th part of the trees are burnt. In 1853, John Faulkner claimed that in 1835 his men reached with great joy the basin at Melbourne and were delighted, in fact, half wild with exultation at the beauty of the country. The velvet-like grass carpet, decked with flowers of the most lively hues, most liberally spread over the land, the fresh water, the fine lowlands and lovely knolls around the lagoons or in the flat or swamps, the flocks, almost innumerable, filled them with joy. They all with one voice agreed that they had arrived at the site of the new settlement. So parks, much grass, trees in belts and clumps, forest clearings, no undergrowth, abundance. Yet all unnaturally distributed in mosaics. Let's look at those mosaics in 1835. Keep your ear out for how the plants change, although on similar soils. North of the Yarra, the land was park-like, quote, open, grassy forest rising into low hills. But it was not all the same. Imagine a line from the bottom of Swanston Street to Flagstaff Hill. Southwest, hill and valley were grassy with scattered trees. Northeast was eucalypt woodland, open but with dense forest patches. One patch east of Swanson Street and south of Burke Street perhaps shielded a dance ground, an open dance ground, while at Fitzroy and Treasury Gardens, open forest suddenly gave way to, quote, dense gum forest, mostly manna gum. Hilltops varied. Flagstaff Hill was covered with a beautiful grassy surface. It had the appearance of a large lawn. Batman's Hill, Southern Cross Station, was grassy but topped by she oaks. A creek down Elizabeth Street separated two hills, quote, rising and picturesque eminences on the verge of a beautiful park. One cresting east at about Spring Street, the other west at William Street, each burnt differently. Quote, the eastern hill was a gum and wattle tree forest, and the western hill was so clothed with she oaks as to give it the appearance of a primeval park. And both of those, she oaks and eucalypts and wattles, respond differently to fire, of course. Yet both these hills were lightly wooded, quote, which means regular fire. The west also topped with mushrooms, the east with a grass clearing between the museum and Parliament House. Along the river stood tea tree patches, as you'd expect of a shallow stream choked with debris and flooding easily, but those patches alternated with grass, which you wouldn't expect. South, the river overflowed readily with plenty of tree and many swamps, but also open woodland, dense eucalypt patches and grass, not only on Emerald Hill, which got its name from fresh grass just after a fire, but also on flat country, notably on swamp margins and in forest clearings. So, north and south, fire promoted grass but suppressed tea tree, hid clearings in dense timber, burnt sharp tree grass edges across hill and valley, and put grass on one hill and she oaks or eucalypts or wattle on others. If you think bushfires can make such variety, you forget 2009 and you're on the wrong continent. A few families patterned this diversity. They were not here when Melbourne was taken, for it was winter, a time safe to be up in Mountain Ash country or to go north to trade, which is where Batman found them, wasn't it? They also avoided the city area in spring, when taking eggs and young were banned. They came in summer, when yams were dug, fish and mussels got from the waters and land burnt. By then, they found strangers plundering their country. No doubt the dispossessed people were Woiwurrung, but which families? From their actions after 1835, I guess those headed by Billy Bellery and Derrimut, but these may just be the conciliators and the survivors. And Aboriginal boundaries were porous. Many outsiders had rights of access in varying degrees to other countries. Families managed and inherited their own land, but they helped each other with big projects like initiations, clean-up fires and large-scale hunting, and of course they intermarried. So I acknowledge unknown families whose ground we're on, but as no mere formality. Over the years, my admiration for Aboriginal land management has multiplied. Their use of fire, conservation of biodiversity and sense of beauty were revelations. They integrated ecology and religion, efficiency and harmony, mind and heart, country and future. As Thomas Mitchell famously put it in 1847, fire, grass, kangaroos and human inhabitants seem all dependent on each other for existence in Australia. For any one of these being wanting, the others could no longer continue. Fire is necessary to burn the grass and form those open forests. But for this simple process, the Australian woods had probably contained as thick a jungle as those of New Zealand or America. Today, amid the wreck of what Aborigines made, I still see relics of their management and pay them mental tribute. They depended not on chance, but on policy. They shaped Australia to ensure continuity, balance, abundance and predictability. All those are now in doubt. In the face of such doubt, so basic and so sweeping, can we really say we are managing our country? Can we really say we are Australian? Thank you.